New York City, 2002. The Beacon Theatre glowed beneath the bright Manhattan lights as fans poured through its doors, buzzing with anticipation for another unforgettable Stevie Wonder performance. Inside, the venue pulsed with energy, the kind that made every person in the room feel like something extraordinary was about to happen. Ushers guided people to their seats, stagehands rushed across the wings, making last-minute adjustments, and the band warmed up with quiet chords and soft drum, taps that vibrated through the velvet curtains. Backstage, Stevie stood near the side of the stage, with his hands resting lightly on a mic stand, listening, not to the crowd's roar, but to something subtler, the whispers of sound bouncing through the theatre, the hum of excitement, the faint tremble in the air that always told him when a night was going to be different. And this night, something special was already stirring. Out in the fifth row sat Eli Turner, a skinny 12-year-old kid with wide brown eyes and a nervous habit of pulling at the sleeves of his too-big hoodie. He had never performed in front of anyone, not at school, not at church, not even for his own family. Eli sang alone in his bedroom when the world felt too loud, when life pressed too hard against his small chest. Music was his hiding place, the only thing that felt like his. His mother brought him to the concert as a birthday surprise, hoping it might lift some of the weight he carried as a quiet kid who rarely spoke up. Eli didn't know that tonight would do far more than that. He didn't know that before the night was over, Stevie Wonder himself would hear something inside him the world had never heard. As the lights dimmed and the crowd erupted into cheers, Stevie stepped into the spotlight. The audience rose to its feet, clapping, shouting, soaking in the opening chords of the first song. But as Stevie moved across the stage, something tugged at him, a pull, faint but unmistakable. He turned his head toward the orchestra section, eyebrows lifting behind his glasses. He couldn't see the kid staring back at him, but he felt him, felt the trembling spark inside Eli's chest, felt the tiny, fragile voice hidden deep in a boy who had never dared to use it. Stevie lifted a hand to silence the band. The music faded, the crowd quieted, confusion rippling through the room. Then Stevie pointed directly toward the fifth row. "You," he said with a smile, "little brother in the blue hoodie, come sing with me." Gasps echoed through the theatre. Eli froze. His mother covered her mouth, and in that single moment, a kid who had never sung for anyone was about to face the entire world, holding a microphone that would soon reveal a magic even he didn't know he possessed. Eli's heart slammed against his ribs so hard he thought everyone around him could hear it. His mother gently touched his shoulder, her voice trembling. "Baby, he means you." Eli shook, his head quickly, panic rising in his throat. I can't," he whispered, shrinking into his seat as if the fabric could swallow him whole. But the ushers were already moving down the aisle, clearing a path as the crowd murmured in disbelief. People turned in their seats to look at the skinny boy, frozen in place. Some smiled encouragingly. Others whispered, "He looks terrified." Stevie kept pointing, unwavering. "Come on up here, little brother. I got you." His voice was warm, soft, certain, the kind of voice that wrapped around Eli like a lifeline. Eli swallowed hard, his legs trembling as he slowly stood. His mother squeezed his hand. "You don't have to be perfect," she whispered. "Just be brave." As Eli stepped into the aisle, his vision blurred from a mix of fear and disbelief. He could barely feel his feet. The room seemed too bright, too big, too loud. Every step felt like walking through a dream he didn't want to be in. The audience parted gently as he passed, offering small smiles, nods, looks of support. "You got this, kid," someone whispered. "Go on," another encouraged. When he reached the front of the stage, Stevie was already kneeling, reaching down with a reassuring grin. "Come here," Stevie said gently. An usher lifted Eli up, placing him on the stage like a fragile piece of glass. Eli's hands shook violently as he wiped his palms on his hoodie. The stage lights were blinding. The air felt thinner up here. His breath hitched in his throat. Stevie crouched beside him, lowering the microphone into Eli's hands. The weight of the mic made Eli's arms dip, as though he wasn't strong enough to hold it. "Hey," Stevie said softly, "don't look at them. Look right here." He tapped Eli's hand. "Sing to the mic, not the room." Eli nodded slowly, swallowing the giant lump in his throat. I've never sung in front of anyone," he whispered. Stevie smiled. "Good," he said gently. "Then tonight, Let your voice meet a world for the first time. He placed a steadying hand on Eli's back. The theater fell into a hush deeper than before. The band waited, frozen. Tens of thousands of breaths stayed suspended in the air. Eli lifted the microphone toward his shaking lips. His chest tightened, his throat closed, his eyes burned. And then, just like that, Stevie whispered, "Take one breath and let it find you." Eli did. He inhaled slowly, trembling, and prepared to release the first sound of his life into a world that had no idea what was coming. Eli closed his eyes, the stage lights burning through his eyelids in a soft, reddish glow. His breath quivered as he tried to steady it, but nothing felt steady. His legs were shaking, his fingers were trembling, and his heart was pounding so loudly he wondered if the microphone might pick it up. The theater had gone absolutely silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle, not a whisper. Thousands of people waited, leaning forward, as if afraid even their breathing might break the fragile courage forming inside this 12-year-old boy. Stevie kept one warm, grounding hand on Eli's back, steady but never pressing. "Whenever you're ready, little brother," he murmured. "There's no rush." Eli swallowed hard, tasting fear and hope tangled together. He had spent his whole life hiding this part of himself. Now the world was waiting to hear it. He lifted the microphone closer, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped it. His first attempt at a note came out as a faint breath, nothing more than a whisper of air, too soft to reach the first row. Eli winced and lowered the mic, face flushing hot with embarrassment. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the crowd, but not a single person laughed. Instead, the silence deepened, becoming a blanket rather than a spotlight. Stevie leaned closer. "Hey," he said softly, "that wasn't wrong. That was your first step." Eli blinked hard, trying to fight back tears. "I'm scared," he whispered. Stevie smiled, a slow, gentle smile that felt like sunrise. "Good. That means you care." The words sank into Eli's chest, settling his breath, untying the knot in his throat just enough to make space for something new, something brave. Eli lifted the mic again, this time with both hands to keep it steady. He took a deeper breath, the kind his mother always told him to take when his anxiety got too big. The air filled his lungs, and this time, when he opened his mouth, a sound came out. A tiny sound, trembling, fragile, but undeniably a note. It quivered like a small bird taking its first attempt at flight. The crowd gasped, not loudly but softly, collectively, as if the sound had touched something tender inside them. Eli's eyes fluttered open at the reaction. I did it," he whispered. Stevie squeezed his shoulder. "You sure did." That tiny note, barely louder than a breath, held a purity that wrapped itself around the entire theater like a ribbon of light. And in that moment, everyone in the room knew whatever was coming next had the potential to be extraordinary. That tiny, trembling note hovered in the air, and something inside Eli shifted, like a match flickering to life in a dark room. He stood a little straighter, his shoulders loosening just enough for breath to move more freely through his chest. The crowd remained utterly silent, perched on the edge of their seats, as though they'd been enchanted by the fragile beauty of that first sound. Stevie leaned just a little closer, his voice warm and steady. "There you go, little brother. Now take another breath. Let the next one come from deeper." Eli nodded with a jerky motion, inhaling shakily through his nose the way he'd done countless nights alone in his bedroom. His fingers tightened around the microphone, anchoring him to something real as adrenaline surged in his veins. He lifted his chin, only slightly, but enough, and opened his mouth again. This time the note came out stronger, not loud, not polished, but warm, clear, and startlingly honest. It floated into the theater like a beam of light, pushing through a crack in the clouds. One of the backup singers pressed her hand to her chest. The pianist stared, eyebrows raised. A man in the balcony whispered, "Oh my God," without meaning to. Eli heard none of it, but he felt something shift around him, an energy change, a warmth rising through the silence, a collective breath pulling him forward. His expression softened as the sound vibrated gently in his throat. This was the voice he had hidden for years, the voice he thought wasn't good enough, the voice fear had shoved deep inside him. And now it was out, free, alive. It felt like stepping out of a shadow and finally seeing sunlight for the first time. Stevie sensed the transformation and slowly removed his hand from Eli's back, not as withdrawal, but as an invitation. You're standing on your own now. The band, still frozen in reverent silence, exchanged glances, ready to follow Stevie's cue whenever he gave it. But he didn't give it. Not yet. This moment belonged to the boy with the shaking hands and the newly opened voice. Try a little phrase, Stevie whispered, tilting his head in encouragement. Just a few words, whatever comes. Eli hesitated, breath trembling. No melody came to mind, no lyrics, just a feeling. Warm, swelling, aching in his chest. He inhaled again, deeper than before. And when he sang this time, it wasn't a single note. It was a short line, soft, shaky, but shaped with startling emotion. The theater reacted instantly. People gasped. A woman in the front row slapped a hand over her mouth, eyes filling. The line wasn't perfect. It cracked. It wavered. But it was real, so real that it carved straight into the hearts of everyone listening. And the boy, who had never sung in front of anyone, suddenly felt like he was being heard for the first time in his life. As Eli's trembling line floated into the theater, a hush so deep settled over the crowd that it felt like the entire building had exhaled at once, and then forgotten how to breathe. His voice cracked near the end, a tiny stumble that would have embarrassed him on any other day. But here, in this sacred silence, the crack didn't weaken the moment. It strengthened it. It made his voice human, vulnerable, painfully honest. People felt it. A woman in the center section clutched her chest. A young man in the balcony wiped at his eyes. Even the security guard by the stage, who had seen hundreds of performances, froze with his jaw slightly open. Eli lowered the microphone a little, his breath shaking. He looked like he might panic, like he might run off stage. But then he heard something soft, quiet but unmistakable. Stevie was humming beside him. The hum wrapped around Eli like a warm blanket, grounding him, guiding him. Stevie didn't try to overpower him. He simply created a path for Eli to follow. "Right here," Stevie whispered, giving a gentle cue with his voice. Eli took in a shaky breath. His shoulders rose and fell, and then he lifted the microphone again. This time, he didn't plan anything. He didn't think. He just let the sound rise from the place inside him that had been locked away for years. The note came out fuller, richer, carrying a warmth that startled even him. He opened his eyes in shock, not expecting the sound that had just left. His mouth. The crowd reacted immediately. Soft sobs echoed around the theater. Someone whispered, "That boy." Another murmured, "He's got it. Dear God, he's got it." Stevie's face broke into a smile, gentle, proud, and stunned all at once. He stepped back half a pace, giving Eli more space. The boy's confidence flickered brighter. He inhaled again, and out came another line, longer, smoother, rising with an emotion he had no words for. And the theater broke. People cried openly. Hands covered mouths. Shoulders shook. Eli didn't see any of it, but he felt it. Felt the air shift around him. Felt the warmth wash over the crowd. Felt something inside him unfurl like a pair of wings stretching after years in the dark. He was singing, not hiding, not shrinking. Singing. For the first time in his life, he was letting his soul speak out loud, and the world was listening. Eli's voice, still raw and trembling, carried through the Beacon Theatre with a purity that felt almost otherworldly. It wasn't the voice of someone trained or polished. It wasn't the voice of a performer who'd spent years practicing in front of mirrors. It was the voice of a kid who had held music inside him like a secret, something tender and private, until this very moment. And now, freed, it poured out of him in soft waves that washed over the audience like warm rain. His second line curved upward, shaky at first, then settling into a tone so unexpectedly beautiful that a collective gasp rippled through the room. People leaned forward instinctively, drawn in by the gentle gravity of a child discovering himself in real time. Eli felt the vibration of his own voice in his chest, in his fingertips, as if he were hearing himself for the first time. Shock flickered across his face, then something even deeper, wonder. Stevie watched him in awe, sensing the shift happening inside the boy. He could feel Eli breaking past the fear, slipping into a space where instinct and emotion finally had room to breathe. Stevie lifted a hand to the band, signaling them with a tiny gesture. The pianist laid down a single soft chord. The bassist added a gentle rumble. Nothing loud, just a cushion of sound to hold Eli's growing courage. The moment the music touched the air, Eli's voice blossomed. The addition didn't scare him. It lifted him. He tapped into the rhythm instinctively, landing on the next note with surprising clarity. Whatever wall had been holding him back moments earlier was gone. His voice, though still delicate, carried a spark, something bright and alive that made Stevie's chest tighten with recognition. "There it is," Stevie whispered, almost to himself. "There's the magic." Then, without warning, Eli pushed into a small run, a tiny, untrained riff that stumbled in the middle, yet somehow landed perfectly. The audience reacted as though lightning had struck the stage. A wave of cries swept the theater. People grabbed their friends' arms. A man buried his face in his hands. Even the ushers stood motionless, tears gathering at the corners of their eyes. Eli, startled by the sound he'd made, blinked rapidly and looked up at Stevie as if asking permission to keep going. Stevie nodded, smiling wide. "That's your voice," he said softly. "Don't be afraid of it." And for the first time in his life, Eli wasn't. He lifted the microphone with both hands, inhaled deeply, and prepared to give the room a sound it would remember forever. Eli lifted the microphone slowly, almost reverently, as though he finally understood the weight of what he was holding. His breath trembled, but not with fear this time. This was anticipation, a spark of bravery crawling up his spine. The gentle chord from the piano lingered beneath him like a safety net. The bassist added one more soft note. The band waited, holding their breath, letting the moment belong entirely to the boy who had hidden his voice from the world. Until tonight, Eli inhaled deeply, and when he opened his mouth, the sound that came out didn't just rise, it soared. It was fuller than before, brighter, shaped with innocence, but powered by something vast and emotional, flickering beneath the surface. The theater reacted instantly. People gasped. A woman near the front collapsed into her seat, hands pressed to her mouth. A man in the balcony shouted, "Oh my God, listen to him!" But most of the audience didn't make a sound. They were frozen, stunned, overwhelmed by the sheer purity pouring from a kid who didn't know he had a gift until this very moment. Eli's voice wavered slightly as he held the note, but instead of shrinking from it, he leaned into the sound. His knees unlocked, his shoulders relaxed, his expression softened into something close to wonder, as if he wasn't just singing. He was discovering his own soul in real time. Stevie watched him with an expression that could only be described as reverence. He stepped back slowly, hands raised slightly, signaling the band to give Eli space. The guitarist added a soft shimmer of chords. The drummer, barely touching the drums, offered the faintest beat, just enough to cradle Eli's voice without overshadowing it. And with each breath, Eli grew more confident, more open, more radiant. He was no longer the shy kid hiding in his hoodie. He wasn't trembling in fear. He wasn't shrinking from the crowd. He was standing tall on a stage he never thought he'd touch, releasing a part of himself he never imagined he'd share. Then came the moment that completed the transformation. Eli took one more breath, slow, deep, and sang a short line that soared so cleanly, so emotionally, that the entire theater shattered. People broke into sobs, loud and unrestrained. The audience stood up as one, tears streaming, arms raised, voices crying out in disbelief. It wasn't applause, it wasn't excitement. It was a raw eruption of emotion, the kind that only comes when something genuinely extraordinary touches the human spirit. Eli's eyes widened at the reaction, his breath hitching as the crowd roared around him. He lowered the mic slowly, trembling again, but now with shock, not fear. Stevie moved beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Little brother," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. That was pure magic. Eli stared out at the sea of people crying, clapping, shouting his name, and a small, stunned smile touched his lips. For the first time in his life, he understood what it felt like to be seen, not for who people thought he was, but for who he truly was. And he would never forget it. The theater didn't calm down, not for minutes, Not for moments. The beacon vibrated with the sound of thousands of people trying to process what they had just witnessed. A kid who had never performed, who walked in shy and hidden inside his own hoodie, releasing a voice so pure it felt like it had been waiting his entire life for this exact moment to emerge. Audience members wiped their faces, hugging strangers, shaking their heads in disbelief. Some were still crying openly, unable to stop. Others were laughing through their tears, pointing toward the stage as if they were trying to convince themselves it really happened. The stage crew stood frozen along the wings, hands over their mouths. The backup singers clung to each other, whispering, "Did you hear that run? Did you hear him?" Even the band, musicians who had played for decades, looked shaken, blinking away tears they didn't bother to hide. Stevie walked Eli backstage with an arm wrapped around his shoulder, the boy trembling not from fear now, but from adrenaline and emotion crashing through him in waves. The moment they stepped behind the curtain, Eli's mother rushed forward, tears streaming down her cheeks. She pulled him into her arms so tightly he let out a small, surprised laugh. "Baby, I didn't know," she whispered, sobbing into his shoulder. "I didn't know you had that in you." Eli's voice cracked. "I didn't know either." Around them, members of the crew gathered in stunned silence. A lighting tech wiped his face. A stagehand sniffled. Even one of the security guards muttered, "That kid, that wasn't just singing, that was something else entirely." Stevie stood there smiling, hands clasped in front of him, as though he were witnessing something sacred. "You didn't just sing, little brother," Stevie said softly. "You let your heart speak, and everybody heard it." Eli looked up at Stevie, his eyes still glossy with disbelief. Why did you pick me?" he asked quietly. Stevie knelt so he was at eye level, placing a gentle hand on Eli's shoulder. "Because I felt your spirit," he said, "and your spirit had a song to share." Eli swallowed hard, tears spilling down his cheeks as the truth of those words sank in. For the first time in his life, he felt seen, truly seen. Not for his shyness, not for his silence, but for the gift he didn't know he carried. The audience's roar still shook the walls behind them, refusing to fade. Stevie stood and squeezed his shoulder. "Remember this night," he said. "This is the beginning, not the end." And as Eli stepped into his mother's arms once more, surrounded by awe-struck musicians and crew members who would talk about this moment for years, he felt something new settle quietly inside him. A spark of belief, small but steady, a belief that his voice mattered, a belief that he mattered, and for the first time ever, he believed it might be true.